Kia ora and welcome to the Aotearoa Rugby Pod. Once again, 2024 Super Rugby just keeps on showing us that we don't really know what on earth is going on. Once again, teams get toppled, teams get up. We've got a bit to talk about this week, guys, because the Brumbies 27, the Hurricanes 19 was not something many people picked based on what we'd seen in previous weeks. I know that the Brumbies won 6 in a row against the Hurricanes at home, but based on what we've been seeing, it didn't look very likely. Brenna, what were your first thoughts watching that game about this Hurricanes team and how things changed?
Yeah, I think it just shows the competitiveness of the competition. I think, the Brumbies would have been disappointed with their result previously, and I think they went back internally, and I think knowing what the Hurricanes had done, we've spoken massively around them, around their loose forward, their tight five, being able to win quick ball and being able to, get over that advantage line and gain line success. So I think, look, they were stern in and around their forward pick. I think, in that first half, they had better gain line percentages and they were tackling at 91%, which Jip has alluded to a lot in this podcast around their defensive system being at that 70, 79%. They were a lot better in that space. And I think that clean out, Jip, I don't know if you saw it, but they were cleaning corners and taking guys to the ground. It seemed very, very physical, and they were very simple in their approach around getting very quick ball and dominating that collision area. And you saw early on a few missed tackles from the Hurricanes due to that quick ball and that gain line success. But at the same time, I thought their attack, Tamati Tua, was massive for the Brumbies on the weekend. I thought, knowing that the Hurricanes do bring a massive line speed, their second pivot was a lot deeper to try and get to the edge or being able to kick in behind. So I thought they also took their opportunities as well. They haven't been as clinical this year, but I thought there were moments in that game that they were able to score points and accumulate pressure. And probably the first time the Hurricanes have felt pressure, and probably something that I think will set them up nicely. I think they'll learn from that, and knowing that sometimes when you do have a loss, when you're on a good run, you go a little bit deeper around your prep and your analysing and how things went. So yeah, very impressive from the Brumbies, and they continue the streak of beating the Hurricanes in Canberra.
The big thing for the Hurricanes, which was different, was they didn't have a lot of ball and they didn't have a lot of territory. And I thought the Brumbies really executed their kicking strategy really well. And then I agree. I think they dominated the collision area, especially around that breakdown, and also the one-on-one tackles. You mentioned Tamati Tua, he obviously scored a great try, but so often we've seen in previous games, I suppose the Hurricanes have dominated position, dominated territory, and really pressured teams and their skill set through that line speed pressure. They just weren't able to execute it. And I think it's worth noting, sometimes you do have these bogey teams, and maybe it creates a little bit of a mental hoodoo of such. And the Brumbies do seem to have, particularly in Canberra, the Hurricanes number.
If your team's looking at how you beat the Hurricanes, I think the Brumbies set up a pretty good DNA in and around there. I think, with line speed pressure, if you're able to get over that ball and clean corners and being able to make it a little bit tighter, and your second pivot is a bit deeper, you have the opportunity to be able to get to the edge. Tamati Tua made some really good decisions around carrying, but also, later in the piece in that game, being able to get the ball to the edge and then put it in behind, Ruben Love with their fullback in behind coming up. So, I think if teams are looking at that, it's a pretty good DNA of what is required to beat these Hurricanes. And to the Brumbies' credit, they were able to do that for long periods of the game. I think it's going to be the challenge against this Hurricanes team. You've got to be able to stay on for 80 minutes. Yes, you're not going to win all the moments, but if you can collectively stay on for long periods of time, and like they did, and get out to a very good lead early on, the Hurricanes have to chase, and then they have to start asking questions around how they can beat them.
Yeah, Bryn, totally agree. I think that cleaning corners was massive for the Brumbies because it shortened up. As you know, if you want to run a rush defence, you need numbers on feet. And if you can clean corners around that breakdown, one, make the ruck a little bit deeper, so the defence has to step back and be online. But then if you can hold bodies in that ruck, it means they've got 12, maybe 12 probably best case scenario if you do it well, to get up and get that line speed pressure. And then if your one-on-one tackling's off, it does work into your hands. And I thought the Brumbies really controlled that contact area. We've talked about the loose forwards of the Hurricanes, every week. I think anyone's allowed an off week. I don't think it was off. I mean, she still made 20 tackles, but the Brumbies probably put in their best performance this season, in my opinion. I still think they've got some defensive frailties that the Hurricanes weren't able to take advantage of. But they are timing their run quite nicely, the Brumbies.
Chip, it was interesting you say he made 20 tackles, because you kind of felt the reason he had to make 20 tackles was part of the reason why they weren't able to really dominate the ruck. He was off doing something else because he had to.
Yeah, absolutely. And he made a lot of double efforts, and all these things lead into it. Obviously the Brumbies like their set piece. So as I say, I think the territory and possession stats, around that 36, 37, gives us a clear picture why they struggled, because they've had everything, I suppose, on the front foot in the first few weeks.
They seem to be stuck between halfway and their 22 a lot.
I hate saying it because it just sounds so cliche, but win the collision, then the holes, and defence will give you the pitches. They probably didn't utilise their kicking game as much as I'd like. And then on top of that, the Brumbies did provide opportunity. They just couldn't take it this week.
I think we're seeing in this competition, Jip, that being at home for teams, it's a lot different. These Australian teams are very hard to beat. You look at the Reds and the Blues, we'll touch on that. And then the Crusaders have lost in Australia as well. So we both know as players playing overseas, it is a different beast. And so if you don't get it right, which we saw the Hurricanes in that first 30 minutes with the points that were scored against them, you then start chasing, and then it's a lot harder to be able to obviously score points and get the win when you're not getting those results in the early part of the game.
Yeah, and I think we need to acknowledge the Blues and the Chiefs getting those victories in Aussie. Like, we have come accustomed to just expecting that. More so probably Brisbane. Like, Brisbane's a tough place to go. It's so humid, the ball's slippery. It's just a niggly environment. Like, the fans are pretty much right on top of you. Speaking from a hooker's point of view, they are pretty much in your earlobe, giving you abuse. So it is a challenging place to play. And I suppose both the Chiefs and the Blues, they didn't make it easy for themselves, but they got the job done.
Just to go back to that cleaning element, we do have an email that's come through this week, and please flick us through an email to Aotearoa Rugby Pod at sky.co.nz. Go into the draw to win one of these Player Sport rugby balls. About cleaning, this comes from Jared Simmons, I think it is, or Jared Simons. We'll find out, I suppose, in due course. If rugby is going to allow cleaners to purposely go off their feet while driving a tackler who is already on the ground out of a ruck, then surely that tackler shouldn't be penalised for not rolling if he is pinned by the cleaner who went off their feet to clean him. What do you think about that statement, Chipper?
I think there's an art form in tackling the tackler. And if you get it done right, that's part of your role, is to not get put in that position.
Right. What is the art form to that?
Well, I mean, it's allowing, I suppose, 4 legs against 2 as such, because if a player's double team, you can move one tackler, and then your power's allowing to push them through that contact, even if it's 1 metre, that's a win. But if you get it wrong, you can actually land on the wrong side and provide opportunity to the opposition. So I feel like you've got a bit of skin in the game to get it right. If you get it right, the defender will obviously pay the price. But if you get it wrong, you will pay the price, if that makes sense.
And Brendan, that is the difference between 3-second, 4-second, 5-second ball coming out of that ruck. And that's the difference between you getting over the advantage line, scoring those points, and winning in Canberra.
That's exactly it. And there's an art to it. And, good teams, defensive sides, are having that 2v1 kind of focus is really important on both sides of the ball. And, to be honest, if your attack or your defense can get that right, more times than not, you're going to get some really good outcomes off that. And, as a halfback, for me, I know personally, if a defender's coming into that space and they get their tackle technique a little bit wrong and they're on my side of the ruck, we're going to try and milk a penalty. Refs have been a lot better around that, but you do run the risk of not getting that right. So I think both sides of the ball, you've got a job to do, and good defensive sides, like the Blues are probably the best defensive side at the moment, and then around getting that really, really right. And so it's a great part of the game, and you need to get it right. And the good defensive teams will make you pay around that.
You get into it on that. What are you going to say?
Just like everyone has jobs, part of your job as a person that cleans out is you want to land on top of the player you're cleaning so that they can't get in the defensive line. And that's what I sort of was saying before with the Hurricanes is you lose 2 players, even one, your whole system of rush D in particular makes it just that much more challenging to cover that space. So yeah, I just think we don't want to lose that, because then you might as well just be playing the ball like league.
So the Blues, Jip, 41-34. They were particularly good right at the end to come through. They showed a lot of guts, a lot of determination. Bryn mentioned just before about the Blues defence. This is probably the first time we've seen that really bent by the Reds.
It's probably been the first time it's been bent all season, really. Like, there was obviously the Blues. Sorry, I'll take that back. The Blues. The Blues against the Hurricanes obviously conceded some points, but outside of that, they've been a pretty clean sheet. And they were efficient. I don't think they're as efficient as they have been, but I do think the conditions of Queensland are troubling. Like, it is another, I suppose, with the humidity and the heat, and I suppose the travel as well is always going to sort of drain the tank a little bit quicker. What I loved about them is how efficient they were in attack. Like, when they got their opportunity, they took it. I think they had 7 entries, 6 tries, really clinical when they got down that far end. So probably an area that has been a struggle. Like, if we look back at the Crusaders game, there were a lot of opportunities for the Blues at Eden Park, put more points on. They didn't quite do it, whereas I think even though they weren't as efficient on defence, this is a real big win. And then what we've seen from the Blues, and let's remember that Hurricanes game, there were sort of issues around subs and so forth, 6-2 split bench, and it posed its challenge with 2 HIAs. Not making excuses, but I suppose they seem to, in the big moments when the game's on the line, be able to come through, which we haven't seen, certainly not in my time when I played there, and probably when it's mattered, especially against the Crusaders the last few seasons, when it's a finals match. When it's on the line, the Blues haven't quite been able to get across that. That was the most impressive thing for me. The composure, the skill set, the ability to keep playing towards the end was just special.
Yep. Bryn, there were effort plays throughout. I think, Funaki's chase on the plumber kick, those kind of things, like, it makes you think this is a championship team dialed in, certainly a team that is very much in the running for that.
Yeah, and I think it shows your environment when you've got players that are doing that consistently, and it shows the amount of care and trust that you have for your players, and I guess what you believe in within your team. So, yeah, look, the Blues did really well, and we've got to credit the Reds. But that forward pack of the Reds, very similar to what the Brumbies do. A lot of the Australian teams actually in and around that breakdown area have been pretty ruthless, I believe, this year. And I think, the Reds, anytime they get into that 22, I don't know, there were about 3 or 4 times in that game where they were in multiple phases of 10, 15 plus phases when they get into that zone. So, the Australian teams, and especially the Reds, when they get into that area, they are brutal in and around being able to hold on to their ball and, I guess, zap the energy, especially in Suncorp against the Blues, to get the job done. So we've got to credit the Reds. But, yeah, I think what I really enjoyed from the Blues is that, I think it was 31-20, Tim Ryan, who had a great debut as a young man, hat-trick, hell of a try. And I think, coming back to the Blues, with Kurt Eklund and Sam Locke and, those guys coming on were pretty big and around the bench. And I think Hoskins Satutu in that last 10 minutes, he looks like he's the fittest he's ever been, Jip. The effort areas have been able to play for 80 minutes, have been able to come up big. He's been huge for the Blues. But, I think lastly, the most thing that I was impressed is they were able to get the job done. They were able to get the job done in pretty tiring conditions, and I think what was involved in, I guess, what was required in that last 2 minutes to win that game, they were able to do it in a hostile environment. So, they'll want to improve on a few things, but to get a win like that, I think how the Australian teams are playing and how hard it is to win away from home at the moment, it's definitely the one the Blues will be pretty happy around at the back end of the year when they get into that table situation.
Jipper, a word on Hoskins Satutu?
Yeah. There's someone in the Chiefs jersey that looks very, very similar in the way he plays in Wallace Satiti. But yeah, I think Hoskins is pretty motivated, pretty determined. He's got the bit between his teeth, obviously left out last year. We all know he's All Black quality, not necessarily been given an opportunity for a long stint in that All Blacks jersey. But I also feel like he looks like a player that sort of put that aside and just wants to have fun. And I know that sounds so silly because it's a professional level game, but when a player can clear his mind and he plays on instinct, there's a lot of training years behind Oscar Institutu now. He is an experienced Super Rugby player, so his instincts are actually, a strong part of his game. And, no matter what he's doing, kick, pass, run, tackle, he's a threat. But Bryn probably touched on the most important point. Physically, he's bigger, so he's dominating collisions, but he's fit. He's going the distance.